Hello everyone, welcome back. In my last video, we saw different states of the draft business object during the draft execution. We saw first state was the new draft instance, then edit draft instance, and third was the active instance. How we can create the new draft instance and how we can create the edit draft instance, which we have discussed in my last video. In this video, we have created the draft instance till now. Now, how we will modify the data in this draft table or in this draft instances? How we can read the data from this draft instances? Once we have modified the data, I want to save this draft data to the active database table. That how I can do. These all things we will discuss in this video, and not only these all the things. During this all the operation, what all are the draft actions are triggering and what is the runtime for this draft actions? Runtime means how it is running these particular draft actions like prepare, resume, activate. There are 4 or 5 draft actions are there, which when we are working with the draft instances, how these are working and how we can optimize this draft actions. Those all things we will discuss in this video. Let's get started. First, we will see how we can create the active instance. Active instance can be created using the directly modify create request without draft. If you put draft equal to false, then it will directly create the active instance. Or you can convert your new draft instance and edit draft instance to the active instance via calling the activate action. This is the one of the important action which is called during the draft, that is called active action. Yesterday we discussed, or previous video we have discussed about the edit action, which will copy the active instance data to the edit draft instance data. And this activate action, what will do, it will put back the whatever you have created the draft, it will activate the draft and it will convert edit draft instance to the active instance. How this is working we will see, but how this activate action will be called. First, when you are working with the front end Fiori, one important you have to make sure you can't create directly active instance. That is true. If your business object is draft enabled, you can't create the directly active instance. You always have to create the draft instance and then save. During the when you click on save, it will call one of the action called activate action, and it will convert the draft data to the active instance. The second way, if you are working from the programming perspective or using the EML, if you want to do, you can directly code the activate action button like you call other actions. Same way, other actions like we discussed in my previous video, accept travel, reject travel, in same way you can call the activate action. I think I have written somewhere code also how we can call. You can see here, you can call directly activate action, you can execute activate, and you can pass the key field. What it will do, it will, whatever the data available on the draft instance, it will activate those data and it will put in the active instance when this activate action will be called. And when you are working with the front end, it will call automatically when you click on the save button. Now what will happen during the activate action button? So what it will do, it will copy, or by executing the draft action activate, it will, the draft instance, it will copy to the active instance. Second thing, as soon as it will copy to the active instance, it will discard the draft. Whatever the draft you are having, either it's coming from the new draft or edit draft, once it will activated, that time the draft will be discarded. Third thing, after you copying the active instances, till now it is not saved in your active table. As soon as you trigger the commit entities statement, or that time the save sequence will trigger, it will copy this active instance data, or it will save this active instance data to the active table. And as soon as the commit entities will trigger, obviously save sequence will trigger, and how the save sequence work runtime, that I also explained in the normal our managed scenario and unmanaged scenario. But that the save sequence, when it will trigger, when the commit entities statement will trigger. Till that time the data will remain in the active instance. And one more important, activate action is only possible on the draft instance. You can't execute the activate action on the active instance. Obviously the data is already activated, and the how from the Fiori element UI it work, that I already explained. That time also you have to click on save button. What it will do, it will copy the data from edit draft to the active instance, and it will do the commit work, and save sequence will be triggered, and then it will save the data in the database table. So this is how activate action is working, and this is the EML statement. You can directly, if you are not working with Fiori, you are working from backend, you want to call this activate action button, you have already draft data, you can call the execute activate and pass the key fields. It will be executed and it will save the data from your draft instances to the active instances, not a table, draft instances which we have already on the application buffer. From that it will copy, and it will copy to the active instances which is also available on the application buffer, and once the commit entities will trigger, it will save in the database table. So this is how the activate action is working. This we have already defined in our draft based video that we already did in our program, but I'm explaining one by all the things. So when we see proper execution, what it is happening, so we can understand easily. When this activate action will call, what all are the things is happen in backend. So in how the runtime look like, we saw the create, update, delete, modify and save sequences, all the runtime. The same way this activate action have some runtime, what all are the method will be called. So what it will do, when as soon as you execute this statement via EML, or you click on the save button, and activate action is called internally by the framework. The first thing it will do, it will check the draft for the user. For this draft user, the draft is already available. If it is available, then it is already logged or not. If it is not logged, then it will call the another action called the resume action. Resume action, what it will do, basically it will log the data. We will discuss in detail this action also, resume action, but as of now you can understand, it will log the data. It will put the log on that particular draft data. So, and if you have some additional implementation for that resume action, that will be called, first thing logging is done, then second action will be called the prepare action. Within the activate action, this resume action is called, then second prepare action is called. The prepare action is the another important action. It will call the validations and the determinations which you define on the prepare, that we will gonna do in our application also. Those determinations and validations will be called on top of this draft instance, and the draft data is validated, and using the determination data is modified, and it will save in the draft instance. And once this prepare action is called, then what we will do, since we are activating the data, we will assign the new key field in our activate table, then modify active instance to according to the draft instance. You will copy the draft instance data to the active instance data, and if you have some additional implementation on the active action, that will be called. Once it is called, then what you will do, your existing draft, whatever you have, you will discard, because you have copied that draft data. So you will discard from the table. And how this discard action is working, this is another kind of actions. Within the active action, we are calling three actions. One is the resume action, another is the prepare action, and third is the discard action. Discard draft action, what it will do is it will discard the draft from the draft table, and if you have some additional implementation during the discard, that also will be called. And finally, the commit entities statement, when it will trigger, then it will call the save sequence. During the save sequence, again we have a lot of things. We have the validations, we have the save before check, those all the methods during the save sequence, it is that it will be called, and the data will be saved in the database, and we will do the cleanup activities, and this is how the activate action is triggering. There is one important thing you might have noticed. We are calling the determinations and validation during the prepare state on the draft instance, and once when we are activated the data, and when we are saving the data, during the save sequence also we are calling the validations and the determinations. So we are calling the multiple time validations and determinations and on the same kind of data. So that is not good thing. To avoid that, we have something called the optimization of this particular activate action. Activate action can work in two ways. One, without optimization. Second, with optimization. When it will work without optimization, it will impact that how your determination on modify is calling, first thing, and second thing, how your determinations and validations on save is calling. So first we will understand determination which is calling on modify. So as soon as you modify the draft instance, that time the determination on modify will be called during the draft changing. Whenever we are modifying the draft, those determination will be called. But when we activate the data using the activate action button, you are creating the draft from the draft instance, the activate instance. That time also those modification which we have defined on the determination, which will be called again on the active instance as well. But when you use activate action with optimization, that time it will not call it, because we know already we have called during the draft instance. Why we have to call again those determinations during the active instance when we are modifying the active instance? So this is how the activate action is working during the determination which is called during the modify. Second thing, determination which is determination and validations can be called during the save sequences as well. Whenever we are working with the draft, whatever we have defined determination and validations on the save, those will be called during the prepare phase, prepare action. We have something called the prepare action. During that prepare actions, the determinations and validations will be called, which we have defined on save. And then we are activating the draft instance to the active instance, and we are doing the commit work, and again those determinations and validations will be called during the save sequence as well. So this is the second way. If you are not using the activate action optimization, that time your determinations and validations which you have defined on the save will be called multiple times during the prepare phase as well and during the save sequence as well. To avoid that, we have to always use our activate action as a optimize. If we use activate action as a optimize, then it will be called those determination and validations during the save only, or during the draft instance only. It will be not called when you are commit entities are doing during the save sequence. Those determinations and validations will be not called. There are some of the things are there we have to make sure. If you have if during the validation if you got some error and then you have modified and again then you are calling, that time this optimization will not work. And second way, after the first determinations you modified your data again, that time also this optimization will not work, and those determination and validations will be called again during for the active instance as well. So this we have to, these are the some because they SAP want your data should be consistent before saving the database, so that they want to make sure. So if you after the first determination if you do some changes or during the validations you got some error, then those determinations and validations on the active instance also will be called, and this optimization will not work. So this is how activate action optimize can be utilized to avoid the multiple calls on the determinations and validations. Now let's quickly discuss this part where we are updating, reading and executing the actions on the draft instance and the active instance. First, we will talk about the update operation. When you do update operation, then it will execute modify request for update statement on the draft and active instance. It depends on the draft indicator what you are passing. If it is true, it will modify the data of the draft. If it is false, then it will modify the data of the active instance when you are calling from EML. If we talk about the Fiori, whenever you will change any data on the Fiori screen, suppose you are modifying the data, as soon as you modify data and go to the next, come out from that particular field, the draft modify request for update will trigger, and the whatever the modified field will be saved on the draft table automatically. And if you want to, once you click on the save button, that time it will trigger the activate action, prepare, then activate action. That time internally through the activate action button, this modify request for update with draft equal to false will trigger, and it will update the active instance when we are working with the Fiori, when we click on the save button. This is how the update operations are working in the draft instance and the normal active instance. Most important thing, as soon as you edit some field on the Fiori screen and you come out, you go to the next field, it will automatically save in the backend draft table. Then I did next field, then again it will save, and the draft is saved. We will get one message also that I will show you when I will show you the practical. Not only we can update the data using the update operation, we can perform the actions as well. It depends again. When we are working with the Fiori, if you selected the draft instance, then you are clicking on action button, either accept travel, reject travel, or any kind of action which you have defined on your screen. If you selected the draft instance, so it will be executed on that particular draft, and if you selected the active instance, then it will be executed on that particular active instance. So that you have to make sure. And via EML, it's very simple. If you pass true draft indicator, then it will update the draft, and if you pass false, then it will update the active instance when you work with the actions. It's very simple and straightforward. When you are reading the data, we have to use the read request, and whenever we are working with the front end Fiori guy, so all the data which will be needed for the next operations, for example, when we click on go button, it will read entire 20 whatever the data is available in the database. Not only the draft data, it will read the non-draft data as well, and it will keep in the transactional buffer which is applicable for the next operation. And via EML, if you pass the false, only is draft equal to false, it will read the active data. If you pass is draft equal to true, it will read the draft data. This is very simple and straightforward when we are working with the draft and active instance. But little bit we have to make sure when we are working with the Fiori application, how it is working in backend, that when we are clicking when it is updating draft, when it is updating active data, that we have to make sure how it is happening. That is the reason I'm explaining these things one by one. And how runtime of the modified draft is working. When you modify some data, what will happen? It will check the global authorization, it will check feature control, global feature control, whatever if you are defining some pre-check on the projection layer or augmentations, those will be checked. After that, it will check the pre-check at the base BO level, and it will see first that draft for that particular user is already there. If it is there, the durable lock is already there or not. If it is not there, it will execute the resume action, which in turn it will put on the lock on that particular draft. Then it will check the instance and the instance authorization against the data, and the feature control also it will be triggered. Once everything is done, it will modify the draft instance at the transactional buffer, and the trigger, it will trigger the determinations what we have defined on the modify. After that, the commit work will trigger commit entities to persist the draft state. It will trigger and it will save the draft instance data, and we will clean up the buffer. So this, each time this all the steps are happening in backend whenever you are changing one field on your front end Fury screen. Suppose I change the price 100 to 200, so these all the operation is happening, and that 200 is updating directly in the draft table. Each time whenever you are changing and you are going to next field, it updated there. Even the data is inconsistent, and this runtime modified draft is working each time whenever you are changing any data in front end. So all these operations are happening and everything is got checked, and the data is saving in the draft database table. It's not saving in the main table but the draft database table. If you want to save main table, you have to click on save tab. Save, it will trigger the prepare then activate button. It will copy this draft table data to the activate, which we have discussed in the previous slide. In this video, we have discussed about the activate actions and how we can modify the data on the draft and the active instance. In my next video, we will discuss about the discard, resume, and how we can save finally data on the database. Before going to that video, please like this video, share these videos with others as well. With that, thank you and happy learning.